rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, welcome everybody to Monday's edition of End of the Age. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Irvin Baxter is traveling today, and he will actually be on the air tomorrow. And so I do want to thank you for joining me today. And we're going to be talking, there's a lot going on in the world today. Man, so many prophecies are converging all at the same time. Whether you talk about the world government, the world religion, the precursors to the mark of the beast system, all the different prophecies that are supposed to happen right now, the Sixth Trumpet War, the peace agreement in the Middle East. I mean, we could talk about all of them for hours, literally. I mean, they're all happening so fast, it's actually hard for us to keep up with them. But over the weekend, I know that most of you probably followed it, that we relinquished our control, the United States control over the internet. And so I want to talk about that today because it's very important that you understand where this might lead us and maybe what's going on in some of the other countries because basically we see it as another step towards a world governing body, the control. It's all about they're relinquishing freedom. And so freedom and control are opposite terms. And so we want to talk about it today. What really happened? Because many of us, I actually need the internet to put together these radio programs and our television programs. I'm on the internet all day long, every day. Our research team here functions on the internet. So the internet is a very important part, has become a very important part of all of our lives. And so we need to talk about it today and understand what really happened and where could it lead us. So basically, our world, as you already know, is becoming increasingly dependent upon the internet. Banking, shopping, studying, working, and most of all, most other activities are becoming reliant on this amazing thing called the World Wide Web. Well, the internet was invented by the U.S. military. And then, of course, it spread quickly to the private sector, and we all use it today. I mean, think about it. When's the last time you went to a physical library? Basically everybody I know, if they want to research something, they all go to the internet now. Very few people go to libraries anymore. I can't remember the last time. The last time I went to a library was to vote. That's it. And I can't remember the last time I checked out a library book because now it's all at our fingertips. You can pretty much do anything. People make a living. I make my living using the internet. And so everybody's lives is becoming very dependent upon that. And one of the things that we use here at Endtime Ministries, we use that to share the gospel, to build the kingdom of God and to help people in their spiritual walk as well. And so it's very important what we're using the internet for. But there are people who would like to deny us the right to that freedom. There are people that want to pull God out of society. And so they know that this huge technical apparatus that we have called the World Wide Web or the internet, that they have to get control of that. Because there is a lot of bad that happens on the internet, but there's also a lot of good that happens. There's a lot of preaching networks and a lot of different outreach efforts on the internet that people can go to. There's a lot of great information on the internet. And so there are people who would like to get control of that. So what happened? What are we talking about? Well, at midnight Saturday, the United States ceded control of the Internet's address system when the management contract between the Department of Commerce and the nonprofit Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN, that contract expired. Our oversight contract expired. And many people have concerns that this would eventually allow the UN, the United Nations, to control what is published on the Internet and who have access to the web itself. Though many people ridicule that possibility, it has been proven that people, organizations, and even certain kinds of speech can be censored. And if I have time today, I'll go through what other countries like China and Russia, North Korea, some of the things they do to censor the Internet. And then in the hands of an all-powerful world government, this level of control would indeed be frightening. People who know the Scriptures and understand the prophecies of the Bible, they can really get a good picture of how the Antichrist and his one world government could use the Internet to control the entire world. I mean, think about it. You don't allow anything on but your propaganda. I mean, Adolf Hitler would have loved to have an internet system set up worldwide and to completely censor that, only to put out his propaganda. He would have loved to have that. Well, the Antichrist is going to seek to have the same thing. And so the United States is seen as the last bastion of freedom on earth. And now we just let the Obama administration just let the contract for the United States oversight of the Internet to expire. And so that's why a lot of people are really alarmed. You say, well, why would the Obama administration do that? Obama and his administration, they're all internationalists. They're globalists. They believe in a one world government. So why wouldn't they want to relinquish that? They have felt that the United States has had too much power for years now. So just like they believe in spreading in wealth redistribution, they believe in power redistribution. And that the United States, that there can't be haves and have-nots. It's in a socialistic society. The world government's going to be a socialistic entity. We know that from the prophecies of the Bible. So we can't have haves and have-nots, although in the end, they want a world governing body that oversees everything. But for the common man, everything has to be equaled out. Power, finances. And so that's kind of what we're doing. And eventually, many people believe that the UN will take control and monitor and censor the Internet. One thing that happened to me here at Endtime Ministries, we sell Endtime Magazine, a physical copy, but we also subscribe people to electronic copies of Endtime magazines. You can subscribe electronically. Well, about a year ago, I had a lady from China call me, and she said, Dave, I subscribed to your online magazine, but I only got one copy, and then it ended. Can you tell me if something happened? Well, we did the research on our end, and everything was fine. We were sending the copies, but she never got any. Well, we found out later what happened is that the Chinese government found out what kind of information she was getting in our magazine and censored that, and it wouldn't even allow her to get any more Endtime magazines in China. And so the question is, I was kind of alarmed. I hadn't really been censored like that before. But she got one issue and then boom, it just cut off. Even though she had paid for it, they didn't care. They censored her. And so it really opened my eyes to really what's going on in actually most of the world besides the United States. Most nations are censored like this. They want to control their people, and they don't want them to believe get any outside thinking or outside views. They absolutely want to control what you believe. And so my question today is, could this kind of censorship happen here in the United States? Because we've just released control of that to an independent entity, ICANN. And so consequently, my answer is, if the United Nations or the world government ever gets control of it, certainly it could. That censorship could come here. So, how does the United Nations factor into all of this? Well, let's discuss the International Telecommunications Union for just a second. Or the ITU. Well, it was founded in Paris in 1865 as the International Telegraph Union. It took its present name in 1934 and in 1947 became a specialized agency of the United Nations. Well, President Barack Obama's Commerce Department shifted the country's internet domain system over to a nonprofit organization called the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN, starting October 1st. And so, according to the Daily Wire, defenders of the move argue that it's a necessary symbolic move, what the United States just done, while others argued, or this article says correctly, that it would give control to foreign governments like Russia and China, which frown upon free speech. Well, I tend to agree with that because I know what's coming down the pike, and I know that the Antichrist is want to absolutely censor everything, and he'll have to censor the internet. So we can see this thing already being put in place. So what exactly is ICANN? We always say ICANN, I-C-A-N-N. What is that? Well, ICANN is a multi-stakeholder organization, and it's featuring countries like China and Russia. And so ICANN, it actually helps assign domain names and top-level domains, such as, let's say, .com. All of you are familiar with .com, .org, O-R-G, and is working toward adding even more domain names, like CPA, .cpa, different things like that. So up until October 1st, the U.S. had control over ICANN. We monitored everything they did, and we kept the internet free and open, at least here in the United States, to ensure that the organization would not fall under international control and allow authoritarian regimes to engage in censorship. Well, that is now going to change now that the U.S. government's contract with ICANN has expired, and our government, the current administration, the Obama administration, allowed that to expire. So the lobbying for the end of the U.S. control of the internet intensified really due to Edward Snowden. After Snowden's leak of the National Security Agency's government surveillance emerged, ICANN and other foreign governments used the U.S.'s use of surveillance in other countries as a reason to end the U.S.'s control of internet governance. Well, net neutrality regulations also paved the way for the ceding of the U.S. internet control. Arnold Allert states in the Front Page magazine that one of the main reasons the U.S. has argued to keep the internet out of the hands of the United Nations International Telecommunications Unit, the ITU, is that the internet does not classify as a telecommunication and is therefore not in ITU's purview. However, the net neutrality regulations specifically designate the internet as a telecommunications service. So it's basically hamstringing the country in arguing for the internet to remain out of the ITU's control. So with the U.S. relinquishing control of ICANN, it's likely going to fall under the ITU's control and risk being subject to censorship. Once the U.S. cedes control of it, nothing would stop it from folding into the ITU, especially now that the internet is classified as a telecommunications service. In fact, ICANN's CEO, Fadi Shahad, has been considering the establishment of an office in Geneva, which is the location of the largest UN presence outside of New York. Shahad has also reportedly said that all governments are welcome in regards to ICANN's jurisdiction. In other words, everybody can have a say in this since the United States has relinquished control. At that point, if that were to happen, Russia and China would have an easier time in censoring speech that is not to their liking. For instance, Republican Senators Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, James Lankford, they all wrote in a letter that they discovered that ICANN's Beijing office is actually located within the same building as the Cyberspace Administration of China, which is the central agency within the Chinese government's censorship regime, and that U.S. companies are folding to China's mandates for censorship. It's all in the same building over there. So even more chilling is that the fact that the ITU had passed a treaty that provided authority to governments to close off their citizens access to the global internet and creating a digital, basically a digital iron curtain, if you will. And that was according to the Wall Street Journal. So if ICANN becomes a part of the UN, which John Bolton, the former ambassador to the UN, said that he believes that it would within 10 years if we gave up, and possibly less than that, then they too will be subject to this treaty, putting it all in control. Remember, control and freedom. Right now, it was free up until Saturday night. Now they say, oh, nothing's going to change. Time will tell very soon, because it's highly unlikely, because the UN's been pushing for years to get control of this, and I'm going to go over that here in a second. So, putting ICANN under the UN control would also subject American consumers to internet taxes. Christian Whitten, a former senior advisor under the Bush State Department, told the Daily Caller, if the UN gains control, what amounts to the directory and traffic signals of the internet, it can impose whatever taxes it likes. It likely would start with a tax on registering domains, and then it would expand from there. Up until this point, it's been pretty much fair game, but they can start taxing whatever they want, and by taxing, they can control. In other words, various foreign governments are salivating at the thought of using the internet as a revenue stream. Think about it. And also, they can garner control. If I can charge you so much, I can control you. If I can control the economics of something, then I can control you. It's very simple. So, another article from the Register that I want to go over is the internet handover is go, go, go. ICANN to take the IANA from the U.S. government. It's very critical. This is a great article that I found. And it states the most significant change in the internet's functioning for a generation happened September 30th at midnight, just a couple days ago. At 12:01 a.m., Washington, D.C. time, the U.S. government walked away from the IANA contract, which has defined how the internet has grown and been structured for nearly 20 years, and handed it over to the nonprofit organization ICANN. So, having initially promised to release control of the internet's names, numbers, and protocols to ICANN, within a few months of it signing the first IANA contract, it wasn't until March of 2014 that the U.S. government decided to move ahead with the plan. Several times previously, ICANN had asked to be given the contract to govern it themselves, but the U.S. government refused. The U.S. government wanted to oversee it, even though ICANN had wanted to get out from under them for a long time. And so its position was a useful point of leverage that meant officials always had a hotline to the organization's leaders, and which on occasion they used to force ICANN to reconsider bad decisions. Well, right now that's all been done away with. The United States, the contract expired, and ICANN has sole control over it at this point. So, and this is very key right here. When in 2002, the United Nations came knocking and looked at redrawing the entire way the internet was governed, the U.S. government made control of the IANA contract and a defense of ICANN as its contractor the cornerstone of its negotiations. We said we had to have that, period. So after years of negotiations, that ended literally just hours before the heads of state opened a world summit, and I'm going to go over that world summit here in the latter part of the program. The status quo held. So despite that, when ICANN made it clear in 2006 that it was going to seek control of the contract as part of a redrawing of its agreement with the U.S. Department of Commerce, government officials made it equally clear that the contract was not on the table. But then in 2012, a majority of governments decided to sign an agreement that gave the UN's International Telecommunications Union, remember there's the ITU again, gave them greater say over the Internet's evolution. Well, the United States literally walked out of the meeting, followed by its Western allies. The Internet had become a critical infrastructure for most governments. And tolerance for the United States' preeminent role was growing thin at that point. Now, this was 2012, about 4 years ago. But it wasn't until Edward Snowden revealed the depth of U.S. government surveillance online that the ground finally shifted. All the governments started saying, look, this is crazy. We've got to get control away from just the United States because they're using it for just their benefit. So within just a few months, the U.S. government officials announced that they were willing to let go of the contract and ask ICANN to run a consultation process to decide what to do with it. Well, that process took over 2 years, and it resulted in a series of messy compromises, both the United States and ICANN. Well, ICANN unsurprisingly decided it should take over the contract. That's what they wanted to do years ago anyway. Well, a process was put in place to pull it out of the organization should anything go drastically wrong in the future. So the organization ICANN was going to move into of governing themselves, should anything go wrong, they left a deal in the contract that they could pull out. But it was so weighed down that it was almost certainly never to happen like that. So you say, well, man, now we've given it up. What are we going to do? Who's going to manage it? Well, I'll be covering that in the next segment of the program. But before we go into the next segment of the program, you say, well, what's all this about? Well, this is the process of globalization. We're watching this. If you can just picture with me, and that's really a lot of what this election will hinge on, the process of globalization, moving either one side wants to move us into the arms of the world government, the process of globalization. One, it appears, wants to move us away from that. So you look at the process of globalization, moving us towards a one world governing body. In other words, let me define the process of globalization for you. It's to do away with the nation states, and I'm going to stay right here, and then I'll continue on during the next program. It's globalization. It's very important that you understand this because that's where what's going on with the internet as well. The process of globalization. Even though on the surface they say, well, the United States is, they just let the contract lapse. You just don't let contracts lapse like that. That just doesn't happen on accident. There's reasons why all this stuff is happening. And so the process of globalization is there are internationalists, globalists who believe in a one world governing body. They want to tear down the borders of every nation, and they want to have one global community, one global city. I'm reading a book now by Strobe Talbot called The Great Experiment. And he tells in detail how all this is coming to pass. Every nation on earth in this century, he's saying every nation on earth they're going to remove all their borders, yield up their sovereignty to a one world governing body, and nation states will cease to exist. They will all answer to this one world government. Well, in order to do that, this one world governing body is going to have to control the means of propaganda. Well, at this point, think about it. They absolutely look at how the news is right now. The media. Look at how controlled. Everything you see in the media, very little of it's true. Think about that. And I learned some stuff over the weekend from a friend of mine And I didn't realize, a very reliable source, and I didn't realize how far off into this we are. I knew we're way off into this world government and all the yielding up our sovereignty and things like that. But from what I heard over the weekend, it had explained to me, which I can't reveal right now because he has a level of clearance that I can't reveal. And so I can't tell you that over the air, but I can tell you that the process of globalization and this move into a one world government is actually farther than what I thought it was. And I live in this world all day long, every day. And it was actually a little farther than what I thought it was. But after reading some of these books that I've been reading, like the New World Order by Henry Kissinger and The Great Experiment by Strobe Talbot, I realize what we're doing. I understand now that over time, one global governing entity after another, there's always been a central figure, and then they've had a kingdom or a realm here on earth. And they didn't necessarily care which religion you believed in, where you lived. They didn't have to gather all of them together. You could live wherever, like in the Roman times. When the Roman Empire was here, the Jews could still live in Jerusalem. They didn't really care about it early on, as long as they paid obeisance to Caesar. You could say, well, you can believe in you can believe in the Hebrew God, you can believe in whatever God you want to, as long as you pay obeisance back to Caesar and pledge allegiance to him. You pay your taxes, this, that, and the other. Well, that's the same way the Antichrist is going to rule the world. He's going to have a kingdom, and he's going to be the central figure. You can believe whatever you want to as long as you pay obeisance to him. Well, that's the process of globalization. Everybody yielding up their sovereignty to this one world governing body. Now, in the next segment, I'm going to read a letter that 77 ex-military generals, admirals, intelligence experts, cybersecurity professionals, and industry leaders wrote to President Obama.
Our brand new series has arrived, From Here to Armageddon. In this 8-lesson series, Irvin Baxter will outline the exciting events recorded in the Bible that tell what will happen between now and the second coming of Jesus Christ. He will explain the prophecies that will lead to the greatest revival the world has ever known and how you can be a part of it. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com to get your copy of From Here to Armageddon.
Who would have thought it, that the Berlin Wall is right there in the prophecies of the Bible? I'm holding here a chunk of the Berlin Wall. A friend of mine was in Berlin the night that the wall fell, November 9, 1989. He cut a piece of the wall for himself, twice this large. He was kind enough to cut it in half. He had read my book, A Message for the President, in which I had stated 3 years before this that the Berlin Wall would come down, the two Germanys would be reunited, and that would be the event that would mark the beginning of the one world governmental system called the New World Order.
Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME to order The Berlin Wall in Bible Prophecy.
If your radio station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the Watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the Archives button.
Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the United States relinquishing control of the internet. And I want to read a letter that many of our military leaders and different people wrote to the Obama administration, urging them not to terminate the contract between the NTIA and ICANN, and they were completely ignored. So the Obama administration ignored ex-military generals, military admirals, intelligence experts, cybersecurity professionals to hand over the internet, control of the internet, to ICANN. So you say, what happened? Well, on September 26th, a stellar coalition of 77 generals, ex-military generals, ex-military admirals, intelligence experts, cybersecurity professionals, and industry leaders sent a letter to the Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joseph Dunford, calling on them to intervene in opposition to President Obama's radical plan to jeopardize the security of the internet, which of course is vital to national and global security. So what happened? September 26th, I'm going to read you the letter. September 26, 2016, to the Honorable Ashton B. Carter, Secretary of Defense, and General Joseph F. Dunford, Jr., Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. And the letter states this: Dear Secretary Carter and Chairman Dunford, as individuals, now remember, these guys are all ex-military as high as you can get. And this is the letter that they wrote the Obama administration to try to keep them, they were giving their concerns to try to keep them from handing the internet over to ICANN. And it's very important because this is a very, very important letter, and it was completely ignored. And when we get done, I'm going to tell you a couple of the people that had a hand in writing the letter. You're going to be shocked that they would just be ignored like nothing. So listen at this. As individuals with extensive first-hand experience with protecting our national security, we write to urge you, Obama administration, to intervene in opposition to the imminent action that would, in our judgment, cause profound and irreversible damage to the United States' vital interests. On October 1st, the contract between the Commerce Department's National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or the NTIA, and the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN, will expire. And of course it did expire. Upon expiration, the President will allow the government's remaining control over the Internet to transfer to ICANN. This includes the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, IANA function, and the NTIA's review of all Internet protocol addresses and authorization for them to be placed on the authoritative root server, the A server. In simple terms, nothing now is accessible on the Internet until it has undergone an IP address assignment and NTIA review, and on top of that, an NTIA has an authorized VeriSign to post the address to the A server. The IANA function is critical to our nation's ability to effectively defend our national assets and civilian population and ensure integrity in our cyber warfare capabilities. Now, that to me, I mean, right there, if I'm the Obama administration, I'm saying, okay, boys, we can't do this. This is too important. We can't give this up. We can't let this contract just simply lapse. These are some of the top generals and admirals in our military, some of the top cybersecurity professionals in the United States. And they're telling us this. This is going to affect the integrity of our cyber warfare capabilities. And this letter was completely ignored. It goes on to state, as Congress has considered this transfer of authority, it has stated that ICANN should ensure that .mil and .gov, you understand, like whitehouse.gov, texas.gov, all of our, the governmental entities have, .gov. And so these need to remain, we need to be able to ensure that they remain exclusive to the Department of Defense, and that all IP addresses assigned to the Department of Defense are used exclusively by the government. That ignores the fact that the Department of Defense is relying upon private sector critical infrastructure for its operations, and the integrity and security of the IP addresses associated with these assets are equally important to the protection of the American people. We have high-level clearance that are on some of these websites, and if we get loose of those, a lot of people will get access to this stuff. So government involvement in IANA, it seems possible that over time, foreign powers, including potentially or actually hostile ones, will be able to influence the IANA process, even so much as coercing the delay in approving IP addresses, and that could impact military capabilities, maybe during time of war. So from a broader view, given the well-documented ambition of these actors to restrict freedom of expression and or entrepreneurial activity on the internet, such a transfer of authority to ICANN could have far-reaching and undesirable consequences for untold numbers of people worldwide. Of more immediate concern to us, however, is the prospect that the United States might be transferring to future adversaries a capability that could facilitate, particularly in time of conflict, cyber warfare against us. In the absence of the NTIA's stewardship, we would be unable to be certain about the legitimacy of all IP addresses or whether they have been in some form or fashion manipulated or compromised. Now, these guys are very concerned about our protection here in the United States, even to the point where they're saying, hey, if we do this at some point down the road, this could affect, if we're in a military conflict and we need to implement some IP addresses quickly, this, that, and the other, if some of our enemies have access to all this and are governing this, we would be in a hurt, a real hurt, a security hurt here in the United States. So it goes on to say, given the reliance of the U.S. military and critical infrastructure on the internet, we must not allow it to be put needlessly at risk. Indeed, there is, to our knowledge, no compelling reason for exposing the national security to such a risk by transferring our remaining control of the internet in this way at this time. So in light of the looming deadline, which this was a couple weeks ago, we feel compelled to urge you, the Obama administration, to impress upon President Obama that the contract between NTIA and ICANN cannot be safely terminated at this point. Simply too much of a risk will be put on the United States. At a minimum, given the irreversible character of this decision and its potential for grave and enduring harm to our national security and other vital interests, the decision should be delayed. And it was signed. Now I'm going to give you some names. And these people are ex-military, cybersecurity professionals, different people that said, they penned that letter and said, look, our national security is on the line here. Do you understand this, President Obama and your administration? Please delay the decision, or better yet, don't allow this contract to expire. And this was sent in plenty of time for the Obama administration to make a decision to do that. So it was signed by, and I've got about maybe 5 or 6 here, and listen at these names. Many of you will recognize them. It was signed by Admiral James A. Ace Lyons, who was the United States Navy retired, former Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. And he's saying, we can't do this. Lieutenant General William Jerry Boykin, U.S. retired, former Deputy Under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. The Honorable Charles E. Allen, former Undersecretary of the Department of Homeland Security for Intelligence and Analysis. Lieutenant General C.E. McKnight, Jr., USA retired, former Director, Command and Control Systems for Nuclear Forces. Joint Chiefs of Staff Lieutenant General Robert J. Elder, U.S. Air Force retired, former Commander, and the U.S. Air Force Network Operations. Captain David E. Meadows of the U.S. Navy retired, former Deputy Commander of Naval Security Group. And then Lynn Schnur, a former Army Chief Information Officer and Defense Intelligence Senior Executive and of Executive Services. So in total, now this, I don't understand how they're making these decisions. I just don't understand. I'm scratching my head. In total, 77 generals and admirals, now ex-military, intelligence experts, cybersecurity professionals, and industry leaders urged the Obama administration not to terminate the contract between NTIA and ICANN, and they were all completely ignored. The people that for the last several years have been in control of the security basically of our country, and if you heard all the names, you'd see what I'm talking about. It's on the internet. This letter is. You would see that these people, that the Obama administration had a tunnel vision here and said, we're going to let this go because of what I described in the first part of the program. We're going to let this go. And all of these people that have been in charge of our security for years, the admiral who was over the Pacific Fleet, they just ignored them, and the letter, they paid no attention to it. They went ahead and let it lapse. Even though these people who said, hey, our national security here is at risk, they just said, well, that's okay. We'll just take a chance. It blows my mind, some of the decisions that are being made. And now, to go beyond that even, according to the, let me summarize here, but because we're going to come up to a break and I don't want to cut this in half. But so you understand that the Bible prophesies there's going to be a world government. There's going to be the Antichrist will assume control of that world government before it's all over with, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, the last 3.5 years. Well, for decades now, since 1945, the United Nations was established. That's our current form of world government here on earth. But before that, even the League of Nations, so almost about 100 years now, they've been trying for this world government. The League of Nations failed after World War I. After World War II, the United Nations was formed in 1945. That's the second effort of the current world government system. And so they're talking about that's what we're seeing happening right now, is these moves toward a one world governing system, and this is part of it. They don't want the United States having control of the internet, because right now, presently, a lot of things they would like to control, Endtime Ministries does. We talk about the world government. We talk about the world religion. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about homosexuality is wrong according to scriptures. They don't want people talking like that. And so consequently, that we would be one of the entities that they perhaps would want to shut down. And so consequently, it was a big decision what happened over the weekend. The United States relinquished control of the internet.
Take your understanding of the end time to a new level with our Outlines and Quizzes workbook. This workbook accompanies our Understanding the End Time 14 lesson series. As you watch each lesson, follow along with the outlines, then take a quiz and check your answers at the end. These are all contained in one convenient workbook so you can study as well as teach prophecy wherever you go. Use it as a study guide to cement main points and scriptures that Irvin teaches in each lesson. It's also a great tool if you host an end-time Bible study. Help your group solidify what they're learning by getting a copy for each person to follow along with the video and then to take home and study on their own. Get the workbook by calling 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and be ready to instruct many as the scripture says.
Well, you have to be as shocked as I am that that the Obama administration would overlook a letter like I just read to you from some very high officials and people that are at the top of their field in cybersecurity and different professionals, and for the Obama administration just to say, well, I understand what you guys are saying, but we're going to go ahead with this decision. I'm totally shocked by that. Actually, I'm not shocked because I kind of know what's going on behind the scenes. I understand the push to a one world government. But how people could make this decision, I'm just kind of blown away by that, because you can't care about the United States if you're willing to give up, you're willing to listen to the people who have been in charge of our security for the past several decades and just say, well, I understand what you guys are saying, but I'm going to give this up anyway, and just let it expire. It's just a horrible, horrible decision, and time will tell what the real results are of this. But I want you to hear one more thing before the end of the program, because this goes it can go so far so fast. And I read an article just before I came in here. They're giving updates all the time. And John Bolton, the former ambassador to the UN, was saying that, hey, within 10 years, the United Nations is going to have complete control over this. I'm saying it could happen a lot quicker than that. But according to the New American, ICANN, the board of directors for ICANN, is actually overseen by the Government Advisory Committee, GAC. So remember that. If you want to go look it up, look up Government Advisory Committee, GAC, and they oversee the board members of ICANN. And that includes 111 member states, including many communists, former communists, Islamists, socialists, and authoritarian regimes notorious for currently censoring and policing the internet and punishing its citizens for politically incorrect and religious expression. So the GAC members include China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Cuba, Turkmenistan, Bulgaria, Venezuela, and other paragons, obviously of less than angelic virtue. And in a television interview recently, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton explained that with this decision, you have the potential of limiting free speech, obviously. And you have the potential of losing addresses and your domain name. A whole state could lose their domain name. So we don't know exactly what could happen, but it's pretty much open, fair, free game at this point. The U.S. government on Saturday, basically, what am I talking about? The U.S. government ended Saturday its formal oversight role over the internet, handing over management of the online address system to a global nonprofit entity. The U.S. Commerce Department announced that its contract had expired and that the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN, which names the Internet's so-called root zone. That leaves ICANN as a self-regulating organization that will be operated by the Internet's stakeholders, engineers, academics, businesses, and non-government and governmental groups, overseen by this entity, this governmental entity that I just talked about. Governments around the world, they're going to have input on this. So rather than the United States having control, there are going to be a lot of these nations around the world, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, they will have input on how this thing is ran now. You see how detailed this can get real quick. Things could transpire. I don't think it'll be 10 years. I think that's way out there before the United Nations will get control of this. I think they're going to want to control it really quick. And so one of the next article I wanted to go through was the Internet to have global governance October 1. It's a call to Congress. This is from the Gatestone Institute. It says what it's going to result in is better censorship for tyrants. The U.S. announced its plan to pass the oversight of the agency to a global governance model October 1. It just happened. The Obama administration says that the transition, they actually stated, will have no practical effects on the Internet's functioning or its users, and even considers the move necessary in order to maintain international support for the Internet and to prevent a fracturing of its governance. Remember the letter I just read you? Obama looked in the face at that and said, yeah, but it's the best for the international community. Really? So the absence of the U.S. in overseeing the governance of the Internet could spell the end of the current era of free speech on the Internet, as well as really free enterprise because of the tax system that many countries would love. They've got it going in their country. They'd love to do it here in the United States. So the question is, what guarantees are there that the internet governance will not eventually end up in the hands of those governments, seeing as they are all very eager to gain control of it? There's no guarantee at this point. And think about this. The Geneva, you say, well, what's the ulterior motive? Global governance. That's what we're talking about. The Geneva Declaration of Principles. It makes it clear that the UN, run by a majority of these authoritarian governments that we've been talking about, they want a decisive role for the governments in internet governance. Think about it. At the World Summit on Information, on the Information Society in Geneva, clear back in 2003, at the Declaration of Principles, and it stated that, and the building the Information Society, a global challenge for the new millennium. This was back in 2003. This is what it stated. The Declaration of Principles. It stated, and this is from the United Nations. The internet has evolved into a global facility available to the public, and its governance should constitute a core issue of the Information Society agenda. The international management, not the United States management, but the international management of the internet should be multilateral, transparent, and democratic, with the full involvement of governments, these governments I just mentioned, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Cuba, there's many more of them, the private sector, civil society, and international organizations. They want to help. The United Nations wants all of those international organizations and different entities to govern how the internet's ran here in the United States as well. This was back in 2003. It goes on to say it should ensure an equitable distribution of resources, facilitate, and there you go. It's like wealth redistribution. Well, this is going to be resource distribution. They want to govern this, facilitate access for all, and ensure a stable and secure functioning of the internet, taking into account multilingualism. The management of the internet encompasses both technical and public policy issues and should involve all stakeholders and relevant intergovernmental international organizations. They're going to want to censor what you and I say. If it doesn't line up with these international organizations, this one world governing body, they're going to censor that. I'm telling you, that's where it's hell headed. And it was a big deal what happened this weekend, moving its steps farther into precursors to this one world governing system. It goes on to say, in this respect, it is recognized that, number one, policy authority, and this is what the United Nations wants to do to the internet. Policy authority, now this was 13 years ago. Think about where they're at now. Policy authority for internet-related public policy issues is the sovereign right of the states, not the United States, but these global states, that they have rights and responsibilities for international internet-related policy, public policy issues. So it's all international, it's global. It's not the United States controlling it, it's a global. They want the United Nations to control it. The private sector has had and should continue to have an important role in the development of the internet, both in the technical and economic fields. 3, civil society has also played an important role in internet matters, especially at a community level, and should continue to play such a role. 4, intergovernmental organizations have had and should continue to have a facilitating role in the coordination of internet-related public policy issues. And 5, international organizations have also had and should continue to have an important role in the development of internet-related technical standards and relevant policies. And finally, 6, international internet governance. There it is. International internet governance issues should be addressed in a coordinated manner. We asked the Secretary General of the WHO, the United Nations, to set up a working group on internet governance in an open and inclusive process that ensures a mechanism for the full and active participation of governments, the private sector, civil society, and from both developing and developed countries involving relevant intergovernmental and international organizations and forums to investigate and make proposals for action as appropriate on, here it is, the governance of the Internet by 2005. Now think about that. 2005, 11 years ago, almost 12 years ago now. So you can imagine they've been harping on the United States this whole time. Well, all you have to do is get presidents who have bought into this world government scheme and the United Nations and be an internationalist, and sure, they'll hand over. Now, they do it over time. And what they're doing is they're trying to dumb down the American people to the point where they can pretty much do whatever they want. Think about what's going on here in the United States. Think about the immigration, all this immigration, these refugees that are coming. Think about this, folks. They're allowing thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants to come into the country, and we've basically done nothing about it. You know what they're doing? They're trying to see how far we will go before we revolt. That's what all this is about. And I'm just telling you, I know that. And so what they're doing more and more and more just to see how far they can push us. And that's where all this is headed. How far can we push the American people? And they do more and more. It's one thing after another. Chaos in the streets, turning the people against the policemen and things like that. It's all by grand design. This stuff just doesn't happen by accident. And the United States relinquishing control over the Internet that doesn't happen by, nobody made a mistake and oops, we let that slip through. It doesn't happen like that. It's all by grand design. When you've got the leading authorities that have been over the security of the United States, I'm talking about the admiral that was over the entire Pacific Fleet, people that were over the nuclear capabilities, and the top cybersecurity people, professionals in the United States saying, don't do this. You could harm our security here in the United States. The Obama administration looks at them and says, I'm going to ignore you. I'm going to go ahead and let it go. I'm telling you, there's an ulterior motive here. And what they're doing is they're moving us closer to this one world governing body where the United States would relinquish our sovereignty and move into a fully functioning world governing body. That's the goal, and it's prophesied in the Bible, Revelation chapter 13.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.